Okay, welcome back to Thrive in the Future. This week I have Joseph Lofthouse with me, and we're talking about landrace gardening. Welcome, Joseph.
Thank you,
So
Scott.
tell folks a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a farmer. I grow up in northern Utah
Hmm.
in the high mountains and really, well, I grow for market and for my family and my community. And I grow a little bit of seed for that I send out into the world.
Hmm. Great. What kind of challenges do you have in that environment?
Well, so the place where I grow is up in a high elevation mountain valley. And then right next to the valley, there's these big tall mountains, and the cold air comes down out of the mountains all summer and of course all winter too. And so when I was trying to grow crops like warm weather crops, they just had a really difficult time growing in my ecosystem. And I could grow cold weather crops fine, but my customers like the warm weather crops. And so I
Hmm.
was trying to figure out ways that I could grow more warm weather crops for my customers.
Wow. So like corn and squash, you had to adapt them?
Corn and squash, beans, any of the melons,
Mm.
really, and peppers, they really didn't like growing in my ecosystem. And one time I was looking for something interesting to sell to my customers at farmers market, and I found a sweet corn that had like 200 what had colors and flavors that were different than what we normally grow.
Hmm.
And so I thought, oh, that's for my customers. And so I planted it on the same day that I planted my hybrid sweet corn. And the colorful sweet corn, it germinated like 100%, and the commercial sweet corn germinated at 5%. And the corn grew and it produced just these beautiful flavors, and I was just enamored with it, and I decided that I would convert my whole garden to that kind of growing,
Hmm.
which is landrace is what we've come to call it, which is a crop that's genetically diverse, promiscuously pollinating, and locally adapted.
Hmm.
And and because I used to try growing the heirlooms, and they didn't do good for me because they're things from far away and long ago.
Sure.
And I tried growing the hybrids, and they didn't grow well for me because I wasn't willing to put the poisons and the fertilizers that they needed. And the open pollinated crops didn't work well for me because they're so inbred that they ended up being weak little plants and varieties. And but when I started allowing cross pollination between those hybrids and heirlooms and open pollinated varieties, then they could really figure out the genetics to really thrive in my garden.
Hmm. And then you made selections based on what worked well, right?
Yeah, well, actually, the ecosystem does like 80% of the selection.
Really?
And I just have to get out of the way and say, oh, bugs want to eat that one, go ahead.
Hmm.
That one doesn't like the low humidity. It can just die, rather than trying to coddle the plants. Oh, that one can't grow unless I weed it. I just stepped back and said, you survive. I'll save seeds from the survivors and we'll plant the next generation. And it only takes about 3 generations for the crops to get really happy about growing at my place.
Wow. Well, that's like a revolution there. That's everybody's fighting everything and then saving seeds or like you said, buying seeds from Missouri. And
Hmm.
then you know, and even I'm not that far from Missouri. I'm in Northeast Kansas and it's still
Uh-huh.
it doesn't like Northeast Kansas in some cases.
Right.
So,
Well, I first became aware of the value of local seeds when my neighbor asked me why her her crops were always failing when she watered every day, and I only water once a week, and mine were thriving. And so eventually I asked her where she got her seeds, and she said she got them from Oregon.
Mhm.
Damp, cold, overcast, the total opposite of the growing conditions up here, which are dry. The sun always shines every day all summer long, and the humidity is like 5%. And and so if you get seeds like from far away, they're how could they possibly do good in your place? Because the conditions are totally different. Um, a lot of the major seed companies buy their seeds from China or the Netherlands or Oregon or wherever, but it's not local seeds. And so they get here and they say, well, I don't know what to do here.
Mhm. Yeah, and then you have short season, right?
Yes, I have about 85 to 110 frost-free days.
Hmm.
And I have some, the snow melts about March 15th and it comes again about November 15th. And so I can grow some cool weather crops in the early spring and the late fall.
Hmm. Wow. So what are some of the other things that you select for?
Well, the main thing, first of all, it has to make seeds. If it
Hmm.
doesn't make seeds in my garden, it's totally useless. And then the second thing I select for is flavor. I taste every tomato before I save seeds from it. I taste every squash before I save seeds from it. I taste the spinach plants, the lettuce plants to make sure that they taste good so that I can save seeds from them.
And if they don't, then you just don't save the seeds. That's really great.
Right. And they might throw some pollen into the patch, and I don't care about that because over years and years, I end up getting flavors that are just so pleasing to me, to my personal taste buds. And I'm a pretty common guy, and so what I like, other people tend to like too.
Hmm.
Um, one day after I'd been farming for like 5 years, the university done a survey of my customers, and they says, "Why do you buy Joseph's produce?" And so I was thinking they'd say, "Oh, it's local, it's organic, blah blah blah." And what they were really buying it for is for the flavor.
Really? Hmm.
Yes, be, and that's a great place to be as a farmer because any crop that I took to market, people would buy because they knew it come from me and it was going to taste great.
That's
And
good.
and I was totally ignorant of that because for me personally, I just been eating my vegetables all these years and I didn't know that grocery store vegetables even existed basically.
Hmm.
And so I started tasting them and it's like, oh, no wonder.
Yeah, I liked your story in your book about the peanuts and the garbanzo beans, right? So
Uh,
I went on a diet and I stopped eating legumes and peanuts for a while, and then I had some peanut butter and it was absolutely disgusting because it's so bitter, like you were talking about.
uh-huh.
So, so talk a little bit about your squash. I liked the squash you had in your book and how you were choosing for that.
Yeah, so once I started saving, well, so there's two different ways that I use to develop local varieties. And the first way is a mass cross. And I might take 10 varieties, put them all in a field and allow them to cross-pollinate willy-nilly, however they will. And what I found when I work that way is the offspring tend to be have traits that are halfway in between the traits of the parents. And so if I start with great parents, I get great offspring. Um, we've been domesticating these crops for 10,000 years. And so we've got rid of the poisons and the spines and the fibers that we don't like to eat. And so we're starting with really good stuff. And when they cross, we tend to get really good stuff. And the other way that a variety can be developed is you save the seeds from just one variety, and maybe somewhere along the line it crosses with another variety. So I had a buttercup, the Burgess buttercup that I was saving, and it's just a green buttercup. And one year it crossed with the red curry. And I don't like the flavor of the red curry. I don't like the shape of the red curry, but it brought some beautiful orange color into my buttercup. And so I selected back for the buttercup flavor, back for the buttercup shape. And then I had squash that were orange, squash that were green, or squash that were striped green and orange. And that was really a nice squash. And then a few years after that, a Hopi white squash crossed with that, and that brought in pale colors. And so I reselected for the buttercup shape and the buttercup flavor and for the colors. So now I have squash that are white and pink and light green and dark green and orange and stripes. And so I just really enjoy that squash.
That's great. That's awesome. That's an excellent example.
Mhm.
And then you were selecting more for the orange and the beta carotene then?
Well, for me, I really like the flavor of beta carotene, and
Mm-hmm.
that's easy because I can see it with my eyes, and my taste buds agree that that's a really good tasting squash,
Mm-hmm.
and you get that out of the beta carotene. I'm also selecting my watermelon to be high in beta carotene, and
Really?
I'm selecting my basically anything I grow that has that trait I select for. Tomatoes. I really like the orange colored tomatoes, and they seem to win the taste testing contest that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so for me, the oranges are just a beautiful taste and flavor and help improve my varieties.
Wow, that's great. And then the corn you have, that's the Astronomy Domine, right?
Uh-huh.
Did that start with you?
No, that started with the farmer Alan Bishop in Pekin, Indiana,
Mm-hmm.
and he took like 200 varieties of sweet corn, hybrids and old heirlooms, and combined them all together in a field and let them cross pollinate. And then he sent the seeds to me, and I've been stewarding that ever since. So that's been about 13 years now that I've been stewarding that crop. And in the time it's been in my garden, the days to maturity dropped by about 10 days compared to the variety that Alan grew.
Sure.
And I also selected for resistance to skunks and raccoons,
Hmm.
um, just by allowing the skunks and the raccoons for several years in a row to eat whatever they wanted, but they didn't quite eat everything. And so the ones that were more resistant to them, I saved the seeds from for several years. And now the skunks and raccoons don't bother it.
Really?
Mhm.
So they're resistant to skunks and raccoons also. Wow.
Right. And so for me, when I think about pests and predators, I think of them as teaching my plants how to be strong.
Hmm.
And so I don't do anything to fight the pests or the predators or the diseases. I just let them take out what they want, and what remains is stronger and resistant.
Wow, that's great. That's real. What sort of things are you doing with beans?
Oh, so for the beans, the thing that I needed most is I needed beans that could grow without being weeded, because I'm a really bad weeder and I got a really big field and I'm really old, and it all adds up. The and so for about 3 years I didn't weed the beans and just let whatever survived survive.
Hmm.
And that really helps to it really helps my crop to thrive if it can just live in the ecosystem exactly as it is, rather than me trying to fix everything for the plants.
Hmm.
Sure, if I weeded, I'd get higher yields, but you trade the higher yields for the labor and the materials. And so,
Yeah,
you,
I've been doing milpa gardening with just like 40 types of seeds mixed together, putting it into new beds. And then it gets a lot of cowpeas and buckwheat and a little bit of popcorn mixed in, and then it regenerates the bed. So I use it when I'm starting a new bed. I turn it over with a broad fork and then put that down. That's been helping a lot.
I love that
And it's just
idea.
everywhere. And I've got really bad squash bug problems to the point where
Uh-huh,
I'm luckily if I get any squash at all. And in that situation, squash are mixed in and the squash are just all over the place in the beans and the buckwheat, and the squash bugs don't bother them that much.
uh-huh.
So that's been helping a lot.
Um, one day well, I don't notice that I have squash bug problems in my garden, but one day I invited a lady to grow in a little corner of my field, and she planted squash. And I know you're not supposed to laugh at other people's misery, but the squash bugs came and they totally devoured her squash, and the diseases came and they wilted and were just nasty. And it's like, this is so fun because it shows that those diseases and those pests are in my garden, but they're not bothering the squash because the squash and the bugs have and the diseases have figured out some kind of way to coexist with each other.
Hmm. Well, that's great.
Yeah, and that's just because I'm not coddling them. And also because they're locally adapted and they're genetically diverse enough that they can try all kinds of different genetic combinations to see what works. One trait in squash that I thought was really fun that could be useful is a few squash one year turned out to have fuzzy skins. And I was wondering, oh, would the fuzz maybe be off-putting to deer so they wouldn't want to eat it?
Hmm.
Or just some things to think about, that when you start growing genetic diversity, all kinds of stuff can pop up
Sure.
that might be really useful, and you would have never thought about it or even know that that trait existed.
Hmm. Yeah. So what was the verdict with the deer?
So I didn't ever plant that squash again because I because I'm saving seeds. I get from about 100 species, and I just get overwhelmed with all these traits that I could explore that might
Mhm.
be fun to explore, and just run out of time and ambition.
Sure. So do you have a lot of plots a lot of city lots, or what,
So
how do you do it?
I call myself a vacant lot farmer.
Hmm.
Basically, if there's a piece of land that's not being used and it's a burden to its owner, they'll ask me if I would farm their place. And at one time, I was up to 6 different plots that totaled about 4 acres. And that's more than I can handle. And so I started cutting back. And I'm currently growing a kitchen garden and a field which is 3/4 of an acre, about 6 miles from home.
Hmm.
And that's about the right size for me. Um, because I wrote my book and people are interested in my book, I'm spending a lot more time uh, talking about the book and supporting my fans. And so I'm growing less and less, but I still have to keep in the garden to, what do I want to say, keep my edge.
Sure. And then you sell at the market as well?
Well, I haven't been selling at the market for a number of years.
Hmm.
Mostly these days I'm growing seeds.
Hmm.
and I either gift the seeds away or I send them to Experimental Farm Network and they
Sure.
distribute them for me.
Yeah, I've got seeds from Experimental Farm Network that said they were from you. So
Hmm.
yeah, they didn't do very well in my garden.
Ah,
Kansas Kansas didn't like them very much. So
uh-huh. So there, I did send a complete archive of my garden to the Buffalo Seed Company, which is in Kansas.
mhm,
And so if you're in Kansas, it might be better to get my varieties from them
sure.
because they've had a few generations to become locally adapted.
Yep, that's where I get them now. I go down
Uh,
there to they're at the local family owned hardware store. They're sold down there. Yeah, and then I get
yeah,
them down there.
I'm really content about the work that they're doing.
Hmm. Yeah, that worked out real well. They seem like they're adapted. The corn still didn't do very well,
Uh,
but that I had a lot of deer pressure and everything else. So,
right. And I
wow.
have not been selecting corn for deer at all.
Hmm. Well, yeah, you can't. The deer got over the fence, even though even though I raised the fence and they still got over the fence.
Uh-huh.
So we'll try again this year. It's great. What other kinds of um landrace varieties do you have?
So I'm working with 100 species, which is basically all of the common vegetables and some herbs and medicinals. Um, the one that I'm putting my most effort into is promiscuous tomatoes,
Hmm.
because when I started trying to breed tomatoes, they were so inbred that I really couldn't get very much, um, I couldn't make progress very good. And what happened with the tomatoes is when they were domesticated, 95% of their genetics got left in the wild.
Hmm.
And then we spent the last 50 or 100 years doing the um, heirloom preservation inbreeding. And every time a variety is inbred, it loses 50% of its remaining genetic diversity.
Hmm.
And so the whole um, tomatoes species is subject to like catastrophic failure at any moment.
Sure.
And so to try to counteract that, I wanted to get more promiscuity into the tomatoes. And I found that there were some wild species of tomatoes that came from the Andes that have flowers that are 100% outcrossing.
Hmm.
And so that gets the genetic roulette wheel spinning really quickly so that they can start solving their own problems. And also, um, like some studies that were done showed that there was more genetic diversity in one sample of one wild tomato than there was in the entire domestic tomato crop combined,
Wow.
just to show you the magnitude of the diversity that's been lost.
Hmm.
And so I've been working with those wild tomatoes, and that's the crop that I just hold on to, even though I all other kinds of crops start shedding, or I start dropping all those other kinds of crops.
Hmm. That's interesting. What else is your favorite?
Ooh, I really love fava beans.
Oh yeah.
Um, but for my climate, I have to plant them like the day the snow melts
Hmm.
because they have to be growing and starting to flower before the temperature gets hot, which
Hmm.
is about the first week of June or something like that. And first of all, they're big, and that makes me happy. And they have colors like red and green and yellow and purples and browns and speckles and swirls. And so those are a crop that really please me.
Yeah. I got some seed from Experimental Farm Network that was like a creamy cowpea.
Oh, uh-huh.
that was really good. So that one did pretty well. Cowpeas seem to do pretty well.
Yeah, I worked with cowpeas for a number of years, but up here they just didn't thrive.
Hmm.
But I bet they do great down in your area.
Yeah, they're a lot of work. I'm like harvesting a whole bunch of them, and then I got a couple of few cups of beans or
Uh-huh.
peas out of them, you know. And
Yeah.
you know, that's that was a lot of work, but it worked out real well. Good. So what are the some of the ways that folks can get your book? What's the best way to get it?
So my book is available anywhere that books are sold.
Hmm.
So if your local bookstore doesn't have it, you could request it and they might order it for you.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think I have the Kindle version and I have the other version,
Oh
Landrace
yeah,
Gardening,
you
food
have
security.
the original cover even.
Yeah. Yeah, the original cover doesn't have the corn on it.
Um,
So,
just yesterday, I put up a audiobook on Amazon.
hmm.
Um, and it's a computer generated voice, but it seemed adequate enough for me because I'd like to make a version in my own voice one of these days, but it was they could do it immediately and I'm keeping procrastinating.
Yeah, that sounds neat. Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's very unique. I like it.
Thank you. It sold 7,000 copies already.
Wow.
And I'm a little podunk farmer up in the mountains of Utah, and it's like magic to me.
Hmm. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's good. Any other tips you have?
Well, what I recommend is that people save their own seeds.
Hmm.
And if they're not able to save their own seeds, that they get seeds that are grown by a local farmer. Um, and a lot of seed companies, just because they're a local seed company, doesn't mean that they are selling local seeds or
Hmm.
even regionally adapted seeds, that they could get them from anywhere. But if the seed catalog says this variety was grown at XYZ farm in Timbuktu, Missouri, and you're in next door to Timbuktu, then you know that it would probably do well for you.
Sure.
And I also recommend that seed saving be a community effort
Hmm.
so that rather than one farmer doing all the work and then getting sick and losing the seeds or getting divorced and losing the seeds, or a fire comes and the seeds get lost. If it's a community and the seeds are spread all over and many people are working on the same species, the same variety, then it becomes really secure and stable and reliable.
Hmm. Yeah, I like this time of year because as a small community, we get together and do seed swaps,
Uh-huh.
and you'll see grown men get, wow, oh my goodness, I got to have a few of these seeds, and they get
Uh-huh.
excited. It's really neat. It surprises me every year.
Right.
So, and we'll take cuttings over there and some mint and things like that. I have some candy cane mint that is just it tastes like peppermint candy. It's
Oh,
really
nice.
strong.
Uh-huh.
So, and then drying it and put it in tea has just been amazing too. So, yeah, good stuff. Well, very good. Thank you, Joseph. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Scott.
You bet. I appreciate it.